What's up, everybody? This is Alex Christoforou with the Duran, and I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. And today we're going to be taking a look at Russia and Turkey negotiations in Syria. Alexander, we have a lot of diplomatic action going on in Syria. A lot of it is taking place between Russia and Turkey. The United States pullout, which is now very well known to all our viewers, really changed the dynamic a lot, especially in the north of the country. It changed it for the Turks, for the Russians, for the Kurds. What's going on now between Russia and Turkey? How are they managing the situation? Are they managing the situation? Are they talking? Is there some sort of way out now to de-escalate and end the war in Syria?
It's a good question. Right. These are excellent questions. And we are in an ongoing negotiation at the moment because, of course, what happened over the weekend was we had this huge Turkish delegation go to Moscow with the foreign minister and all sorts of people, security people, including one of Erdogan's top advisors. They met with Lavrov and Shoigu and all of these top Russian officials. I am sure they will have met with Putin also. But it's very important to note, or at least been in contact with Putin, but it's very important to note that there is nothing about that on Putin's website. So clearly there is a detailed negotiation going on. Clearly the Russians and the Turks are negotiating hard. There is a report out that the Turks have asked the Russians for permission to operate their air force over certain places in northern Syria. It's not known what the Russian response to that was. It looks like the Russians are trying to broker some kind of deal which will enable the Turks to save some kind of face and to operate in some way in northern Syria, but not to compromise the position of the Syrian government. But then the fascinating thing for me, the thing that I find really remarkably interesting, is that while all these negotiations have gone on, Donald Trump has slowed down the pace of the US withdrawal. Now, there's a lot of discussion about why that has happened, but the way it looks to me, I'll be straightforward about this, is that I think that he's had word from the Turks that the withdrawal within 30 days is too soon and that the Turks need more time to sort out their negotiations with the Russians. So that is why I think the withdrawal has been slowed down. There is going to be a withdrawal, I have no doubt at all, because apparently an executive order to that effect has now been signed.
So you think that there is no way that Trump is going to walk back that pullout? No. He is doubling. He did double down with a series of incredible tweets, actually, where he pretty much said, this is what I promised on the campaign. This is what I'm going to deliver. We're getting out of Syria. So you think the strategy is actually, even though from a marketing perspective, from a PR perspective to the American public, Trump is presenting this picture that he met with Lindsey Graham. They talked things over. He's appeasing some of the war hawks in Congress to say, look, we'll slow it down a little. But you're saying there's actually a lot of diplomatic back channeling going on with Turkey so as to provide a more feasible way to scale this conflict down.
I think that is exactly right. I think that what he said to Lindsey Graham and to all of these people about doing it more slowly, I think he has been asked to do it more slowly by the Turks themselves. I think he's signed the executive order. He's made it very clear that that's what he's going to do. I don't think there's any chance whatsoever that he's going to reverse his position about this. He went to Syria, to Iraq. He spoke to the troops there. He's tweeted about it. He's talked about it. He signed an executive order. I don't think he's rowing back on this at all. But the fact is, no one was ready for this when it was announced. And 30 days just doesn't leave enough time for everybody on the ground to sort themselves out. And I think the Turks, who are clearly in touch with Trump, will have communicated this to him in some way, and he would have slowed the process down in order to accommodate them.
And the Russians, where do they fit in? Are they in contact with Trump?
This is a very good question because, of course, at the moment, contacts between the Trump administration and the Russians are so difficult because of the Russiagate nonsense. But I'm sure that the Russians are happy that there has been more time to this withdrawal, to give more time for their diplomacy to work. And I strongly suspect that they've communicated this to the US in some form, probably through the Turks. So what I suspect has happened is that the Russian military people in Syria have regular contacts with the US military people there. And of course, the intelligence agencies in Syria, the US and Russian intelligence agencies talk to each other all the time. I'm sure there was some contact and some explanation of Moscow's concerns that way. But I'm also sure that the Turkish Foreign Ministry will have contacted the US probably whilst that delegation was in Moscow, and definitely afterwards. They would have said we're in ongoing negotiating process with the Russians. We would like to see this process slow down, and the Russians agree. And I think that's how it's happened.
There's been a lot of talk since the U.S. has said that they're going to pull out of a Turkish invasion of the north. Do you think that's been mitigated substantially now, or do you think there still is that possibility that Turkey will intervene in the north?
I think that is a very real possibility. However, one thing that did come out of the talks in Moscow is that the Turks renewed their commitment to Syria's territorial integrity. Now, we've got to be careful about this because, of course, the Turks have talked about that, and they've talked that talk many times, and in fact, they've not respected Syria's territorial integrity. But the way they did that in Moscow, with the Russians present, strongly suggests to me that the Russians are telling the Turks to back off, and they're trying to control. The Russians are trying to control the extent of that Turkish intervention in Syria. I think they probably realize that there will be some Turkish troops moving across the border, but I think they're trying to restrict their number. And they're also telling the Turks, if you want to enter Syria, you need some control over the airspace in northern Syria. We control the airspace in northern Syria because our air defense system in northern Syria is so advanced that we can shoot down your airplanes, whenever we want. So you have to agree this with us. And that gives the Russians great leverage over the extent of any Turkish military operation. To the Duran itself, you will see a very interesting article by Al Monitor on this very subject about the Turks asking the Russians for permission to send their air force into Syria, and which discusses this issue in great detail.
Okay, Alexander, and finally close out the video by explaining the other pieces to this very complicated puzzle, which is Israel, Iran, and of course Assad in Syria. How are they now involved in what's going on between Turkey and Russia and the U.S. pullout to this stage?
Well, the first thing to say is Israel is obviously been caught very, very much on the back foot with this. They were completely taken by surprise. They've had this meeting with Pompeo. Netanyahu has had this meeting with Pompeo, in which Pompeo appears to have given him some assurances, which frankly don't look to me to be worth very much. I think what we're going to see is that the Israelis, when they have fully understood the implications of this thing, they're going to be off to Moscow also. Netanyahu and his foreign minister will be off to Moscow, and they will be trying to get the Russians to restrain the Iranians from building themselves in too strong a position in Syria, because I think that the Israelis understand that the US is pulling out. I think they understand also that attacking Syria in defiance of the Russians is something which would be very dangerous for Israel to do. So I think that the Israelis will want to say to the Russians, we have interests in Syria. We don't want to see too many Iranian troops there. We want to restrict some of the weapons that the Syrians get. We don't want them to get, for example, advanced fighters that the Syrians can use to launch attacks on Israel itself. And I think that they will try to negotiate with the Russians, and they may need some more time to do that. Now, Iran, I think, will probably say to themselves, let's leave the Russians to sort this out, because the Russians have said very clearly that they're not going to pressure Syria to drive all the Iranians out. At the same time, I think the Iranians will want to maintain a presence in Syria. I think that they're probably fairly satisfied with the way things are turning out at the moment. The Syrian government wants to restore its control across the whole of Syria. I think they understand that they can't take on Turkey by themselves. They will need the Russians to help them with all of that. And last but not least, the Kurds want to preserve at least some autonomy and save themselves from retribution, both by the Syrians and by the Turks. And they will need the Russians' help to achieve that too. So when you look at this puzzle, it's perfectly clear who holds all the keys and who pulls all the strings. It is Moscow. It is the Kremlin where the big decisions are going to be made and where the various agreements are going to be brokered.
Do you think Russia is finally getting close to ending this conflict? Because you say everything lies at the Kremlin right now, and they're the ones that are kind of, holding all the pieces. So obviously they're the ones that can move this towards a final peace settlement, it seems, given any other, strange occurrences happening or something of the sorts. Right now, it seems that Russia can push this along towards the finish line. Can they do it? Do they have what it takes to get this through?
Yes, I do. I think so. I think that the Russians have an unmatched ability to control the situation in Syria, because they have by far the most powerful military presence in Syria itself. They have this extremely sophisticated air defense system. And we've also seen that they also have a very potent and powerful air force. And they have great influence over the Syrian government, and they have great influence over the Syrian army, which is the most powerful military force in Syria itself on the ground. So I think the Russians have the key assets. They have the tremendous leverage over both Turkey and Israel, which in Turkey's case, it's an economic leverage. Also, in Israel's case, it is a security leverage. And the Russians have shown extraordinary skill in using that leverage, masterly diplomats that they are. So I think we are at the end game. I think the Russians are great chess players, and I think they know how to play the end game, the chess end game in Syria, and they will play it with great skill. And I predict that by the end of this year, by the end of 2019, Syria will be a united country. I think the war there will be over. I think the government in Damascus will look very much like the government we have now. I think President Assad will be in power still. And I think the Russians will be as firmly entrenched in Syria as they are now. So there will be an end to the conflict, and the Russians will be there, and they will continue to be there as the guarantors of the settlement that is now coming.
Do you think we've passed the point of worrying about a false flag as well? Do you think we've passed that point, or should we still be a little bit uneasy about maybe seeing some sort of false flag?
No, we cannot say that, unfortunately. We've discussed this before. There are very violent people in Syria. There are very ruthless people in Syria. They've seen how using false flags, and may I make it absolutely clear on this program, some of those poison gas attacks we've heard about in the past, in my opinion, were unquestionably false flags. They are fully capable of trying false flags if they think that they can wreck this process and prolong the war, and that is what they will. Some of these people will want to do. What I think makes it less likely is that I think that the Turks understand that Trump is serious about this withdrawal, and that given that that is what they think, they will not want to complicate their relations with the Russians by allowing these violent jihadi groups in Syria to launch these forced flag attacks. So I think at this present moment in time, you have Turkish intelligence officers going all over northern Syria, talking to all these militant groups and telling them, look, if you launch any forced flag attacks, you are doing so against the wishes of Turkey, and there will be a price to pay.
All right, Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below. Click on that notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. And visit the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt. It really helps us out a lot. And of course, you can donate to our PayPal and Patreon links. They're in the description box down below. And don't forget, you get a copy of this show on audio format. Subscribe and follow the Duran on Soundcloud and on Apple iTunes. And also on the Duran.com, you can get a look at all the articles that Alexander reads. He links them up for you on the Duran.com homepage. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran, thank you very much. Until next time, take care.